Good afternoon. Welcome to the Illinois edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone's been muted, so no need to worry about background noise on your end. You can see here in our agenda that we will be saving some time at the end for questions or comments. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, the place to do it is through the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. You see the orange box with an arrow in it. That shrinks and expands the control panel. When it's expanded, you'll see a section in there that says questions. Go to the far right of that tab and there's a little box with an arrow sticking out of it. If you click on that, that pops the questions tab out. You can put in your question or comment, and again, we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Also in that control panel, you'll see a handout section. If you pop that one open, it takes you to a downloadable copy of the full Farms Under Threat report, as well as the Illinois state summary that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And lastly, if that control panel gets in your way when we're looking at the website and the maps, just click on that orange little square with the arrow, and that will minimize the control panel so you can see it. We are recording the webinar for those who know of others who would be interested in it. We will send you all a copy of that recording, and please feel free to share that freely with others who you think might be interested. So with that, let me introduce myself. I am Chris Kaufman. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network. This is a relatively new network that we created a couple of years ago. It is intended to be an information and peer networking group focused on people or for people who are interested in saving farmland, whether that is through permanent protection, through planning and zoning, through all the other tools in the toolbox. It's a free network. We hope folks will consider joining, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. I also am part of AFT's policy team. I specialize in farmland protection, land access, farm transfer, and farm viability issues. And with me today is Chris Reynolds. Chris is AFT's Midwest Regional Director. Many of you may know him well. He's based out of Central Illinois. Chris manages programs in the Midwest that promote sound farming practices, protect farmland, and keep farmers on the land. Before I turn it over to Chris, let me talk just a minute about American Farmland Trust for those of you who may not know us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are the only national agricultural land trust, and we do protect land working with farmers and ranchers. Some people know us best by our bumper sticker, "No Farms, No Food." We had a bumper sticker before this one that said, "It's not farmers without farmland." And I think that that encaptures what AFT is about. We understand agriculture. We take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives, our regional programs, focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but promoting environmentally sound practices and focused on what it is to keep farmers on the land in terms of their profitability and viability. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy analysis and advocacy, and we work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress, with 6 regional offices and a national headquarters in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all again for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. And RCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now Chris and I are going to go off camera so that you all can see the slides and then the maps at full scale. And we're going to dive right in now to the methodology and findings from the report. So the first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat State of America's Farmland, which was released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms of the Threat State of the States analysis. This was a conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types, urban and high density development and low density residential development. So let's talk about those for a minute. Urban and high density development, you can see here on the left-hand side, those first four pictures are what you think of as the traditional culprits of farmland conversion. It's residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also, though, does include rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development. Anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing is built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit in farmland conversion, and AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. And you see here that this type of development in these pictures, the two ones on toward the left-hand side of these low density residential subdivisions and then farmettes and ranchettes. This type of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base, making production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can be found in these low density residential areas. And in fact, some of these smaller farm parcels can be quite profitable and sustainable, especially those near urban centers. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low density residential land use, it is far more likely to be further converted to high density development. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. Basically, this was a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented from 2001 to 2016 to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that business as usual scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had a projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios in two different ways. We looked at agricultural land types. So what is likely to be converted? Is it cropland, pasture land, woodland? As well as on the quality of the land using what we have dubbed our productivity, versatility, and resiliency values. And I'll speak to that in a minute. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there's simply no national database of them. This means that our maps represent the general patterns and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of lack of water. Mapping this impact is extremely complex and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the web app, though, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that's taking the 2001 to 2016 data and making a straight line projection out to 2040. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, where in fact high housing costs in more urban centers are pushing people out to find more affordable housing, and more work opportunities in remote locations, which will only be improved as rural broadband expands. Some parts of the country may already be on this runaway sprawl trajectory. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential and commercial and industrial development on productive ag land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some farmland, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So a quick look at the assumptions that went into the three scenarios. For business as usual, again, we followed that historical rate of conversion. You see here that we adjusted for future population growth only for the urban and high density development. This is because there is a strong correlation between population growth and high density development. You see here for runaway sprawl that we kept the same rate of that urban and high density conversion as the business as usual, but we upped the amount of low density residential conversion by 50%. And again, this is based on a lot of what we looked at that shows that one of the biggest culprits of conversion is this low density residential development. Conversely, you see that for better built cities, we took that historical rate of conversion and we dropped it down 25% less for urban and high density development. And again, we did this with evidence that there have been cities and towns that are able to reduce the footprint of their growth, and that 25% is quite achievable. We went with a 50% reduction in the rate of low density residential land use conversion. We feel that that was an ambitious but achievable scenario. So this next chart shows each scenario's potential impact. And on the left here in the gray is the actual conversion from 2001 to 2016. That was 11 million acres. 11 million acres just in the first 16 years of this century. Looking forward to 2040, you see that our projections are showing anywhere from 18.4 million to a total of 24.4 million acres that could be converted. Conversely, you see this 11 million acres for the better built cities that we imagine that we could get to if we are smarter in how we do our development. You may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is that really a best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their development, and we hope that they can be, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Illinois compares to other states. This slide shows the projected total acres of in each county that we are projecting for conversion, and you see here that there's sort of two parts of the state, up in the northeast and then down lower in the southwest, where you see the largest amount of conversion. This next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. And again, there is not a whole lot of difference in Illinois in these two, but you see that there are pockets where there is conversion in other parts of the state as well. So you saw these darker red counties on this map. This next one shows that, in fact, one of these counties, Will County, is in the top 12 counties in the country that is projected to lose the most loss of cropland acreage. Our projections show total ag land conversion at Will County at over 58,000 acres, of which 33,600 are likely to be cropland acres. This amounts to the 58,000 acres is about 20% of the county's total farm ground. Another key finding relates to the impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called its PVR value. Land over a certain PVR threshold, we consider to be nationally significant land, land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. Obviously, you all know this well, all of the nationally significant land in Illinois. It is approximately 23 million acres, which is 84% of all the farmland in the state. What we find in our future projections is the conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all ag land, likely because, for the same reason that it is highly productive, it's flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks, it is also easily developed. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this kind of land, even though it represents only 38% of the country's ag land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. To put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to all fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So then this next slide, you see that Illinois ranks 11th among states in terms of projected conversion of its highest value farmland, with over 292,000 acres. Understandably, this is a very small percent of the millions of acres of nationally significant land in Illinois. But the loss of this land affects both future production and profitability, as farmers in impacted counties need to offset the loss of this productive land with less productive land. This reliance on more marginal land can have environmental impacts as well. One of the other threats that we're highlighting with this report is, I'm seeing we're on solar, and I was supposed to turn it over to Chris. So Chris, back to you to talk about solar.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about solar. And so one of the other threats that we are highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land. And to be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map here on the screen shows the projected acres of utility-scale solar voltaics energy generation facilities by state by the year 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization and electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Future Study. That study estimates that there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility-scale solar in place by 2040 to meet federal energy goals. This next map shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same Department of Energy Solar Futures study. We did model conversion of land to solar development, but did not include that data layer in this report because of questions about the data. There is some information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that is available through the Farmland Information Center, and we will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important findings were that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. We're now going to dive into the data available for Illinois on the Enacted website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be our navigator. Thank you, Beth.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Beth. So we are now in the website, and Beth will put a link to this website in the chat. But let's talk about what you see when you get here. This is what will pop up when you get here. This is a summary document right at the front, what we did, what we found. To get out of this document, you just click on the X in the upper right-hand corner, and you get to the maps. Before we go to the maps, let's talk about what you see here on the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You see that About button that brings that summary document right up again. Next to that About button, there's a How-To tab. That will take you to a 5-minute video for those who want to know more about how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. Next to that, you see a View Report tab. That takes you to our Farmland Information Center where Beth is taking us now. You see here you can get the full report, the executive summary, that solar technical report that Chris mentioned, other technical information about the study, and down below the State of the States report where you can find lots more information, particularly about our PVR values and index. We are encouraging folks to use the data layers and ask for additional data that we might have available. You can do that by going to our data request form. Again, it encourages you to say what kind of information you're looking for, and we will be back in touch. And really, the intent of this information is to get this data into the hands of folks who want to use it. So please do fill that out and ask for any additional information you're looking for. With that, though, let's zoom into Illinois. And when we do that, you simply click on the state and see what comes up down below. On the left-hand side here, we're going to spend a minute on this screen. You see that the statewide information pops up. On the right-hand side, we got to Effingham County, which happened to be where Beth had her cursor on when she clicked on Illinois. So how do you read this? You see here in the 3 different scenarios, there's the darker color rust and the lighter color orange. That darker color rust is the urban and high density development. The lighter orange is the low density residential development. And you see that for the state as a whole, it's about evenly split in the business as usual scenario as to what kind of development we are projecting for the state. But with a total of about 363,000 acres in the business as usual and nearly 450,000 under runaway sprawl. When you look over at Effingham County, here again you see that information at the county level, which we hope will be particularly useful for folks at the county level who can now be seeing these projections and the type of conversion with county data. So let's go on down and look a little bit more at what you can find here. Here, again, as we were talking earlier about what type of land is likely to be converted, you see here that it says that 64% of the state's conversion is likely to be of the better, higher value land in Illinois, and that's 44% for Effingham County. When you go down further, you can see how that 364,000 acres of projected conversion plays across agricultural land types. And obviously, given the amount of cropland in Illinois, it's not surprising that the vast majority of conversion is likely to be on cropland at 268,000 plus acres, with 70,000 acres in pasture land and 25,000 in woodland. And a note about the woodland acres, these are obviously not all forested land that could be converted in Illinois. It is woodland that is associated with a farm. And this was modeling that we did in the 2020 Farms Under Threat report, that we were able to associate those woodlands that are part of a farm, and that's the 24,000 acres that is shown there. One last thing to point out here is what I was mentioning, that low density residential land use paves the way for high density development. In Illinois, the projections show that land that was in low density residential land use in 2016 is 33 times more likely to be converted into high density land use by 2040. So with that, let me take a minute just to show you the 2-page Illinois downloadable report, which Beth is clicking on right there. This is an easily downloaded, easily printed, and we hope very useful education tool for all of you to share with policymakers, both at the federal level, state level, county level, and share with membership of your organizations or with reporters. So here you see again that 363,000 of projected acres converted. What we did, what you see these other numbers here, is we looked at what the expected impact of that would be on the ag sector. And so that translates based on data in the 2017 Census of Agriculture. That 363,400 acres translates into the potential loss of 1,600 farms, 218 million in farm output, and 3,400 jobs in the agricultural sector. And again, here you see the 81% of the conversion is likely to be on Illinois' nationally significant land. Lastly, here you see that what we show is the hardest hit counties of being Will, as we mentioned earlier, plus Kane, plus Kendall. And we are going to dive into those counties in just a minute, but you see here, Beth is scrolling down through the rest of the 2-pager. It's got much more useful information on here, and we encourage everybody to look at these 2-pagers and to use them and distribute them freely. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chris, and he, with Beth's help, are going to do some cruising into a few Illinois counties.
Thanks, Chris. And Beth, before we take a drive here through Illinois, let's just, if you can, show the audience the legend up in the right-hand corner. Thanks. And now you can also show them the various ways they can select in the platform. We're currently in the 2016 land cover view, and the legend for each of the colors in the data set can be selected on the right part of your screen. You can also change your base maps by going to the top right corner. If you're map geeks like Beth and I, you'll enjoy the ability to take a look at the satellite view along with the standard view. Satellite view can give you a bird's eye view of the landscape with selected scenarios stacked on top. With the slider up in the right-hand corner, you can also adjust the transparency of the data layer by simply sliding this back and forth. And lastly, you can select the standard view. This offers more contrast for the data, and we really just encourage you to dive in and try your own cruise around. So Beth, let's go back up to the northeast part of Illinois and click on one of those other hardest hit counties that Chris mentioned in Kendall County. There we go. So as you can see, Kendall County was also mentioned in the report as one of the hardest hit, along with Will and Kane County. So you can see the difference there on your right, business as usual compared to better built cities. So right now, Beth is selecting the different scenarios to compare. So on the left, we've selected Runaway Sprawl, and on the right, we've selected the better built cities. So you can see the changes in the color of those areas that would be hardest hit by farmland conversion and development. And so you can see Beth is also changing the transparency as well, like we talked about earlier. And you can adjust and look at the different satellite views as well. So Beth, let's head south. Let's move down to Champaign County. Everyone is familiar with Champaign County, probably home of University of Illinois, also home to some of the best farmland here in Illinois and in the country. So if we'll click on Champaign County, there we go. And we can select that. We've got that scenario selected already for Runaway Sprawl and better built cities. Again, not as much potential farmland conversion, but very significant as well here in Champaign County. And Beth, let's go to one more county before we leave. Let's go over to the southwestern part of Illinois, over to Madison County, just east of St. Louis. As we were looking at the maps earlier, notice that it also has a lot of potential development in that area, similar to some of the Chicago collar counties. So there we can see some of the potentially hardest hit areas of Madison County. And the difference between Runaway Sprawl and better built cities is around 8,000 acres by choosing the better built cities option. So thank you, Beth, for taking us on a little drive around Illinois, and hopefully everyone finds this easy to use and is able to utilize the information that is here on the website. And now I'll send it back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, Beth, for the tour. Now that we've talked about the findings, we want to take a few minutes to talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, or a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope you can find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. And if you are a farmer, a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a conservation or farm or smart growth organization, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let's talk just a minute about some of the things that we talk about in these policy recommendations. Under encourage smart growth. Foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning. Comprehensive plans can provide the vision and roadmap for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans and urge folks who care about the future of farmland and farming to get involved in their local or county comp plan development process. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and ranchers. More funding for that program would help protect more farm and ranch land in Illinois. And just a mention that over the weekend, the Senate passed the Inflation Reduction Act that includes an additional $1.4 billion for the ASIP program. Advance smart solar siting. State and local governments can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual-use solar development. If solar is located on productive ag land, local governments should ensure that solar development adheres to best practices, not just for decommissioning, but for the construction of the facility and the operation of it, all to preserve soil health, water resources, and the ability of a farmer to farm the land during and after the life of the project. Support farmland access. State and local governments can develop their own or help fund extension or nonprofit programs that provide matchmaking and technical assistance to farmers. These might be farm link programs or ones that provide in-depth support to older farmers and landowners looking for a successor or a long-term farm tenant, and to farm seekers needing help with identifying and assessing land access opportunities. This type of technical assistance can be time-consuming but extremely valuable. The Northeast Illinois Farmland Program and Illinois Farmland Access Initiative are great examples of this type of programming. And now Chris is going to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture and what AFT is doing to address ag land conversion in Illinois.
Thanks, Chris. We all know that community planning is critically important for smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. This involves these 4 basic principles that Chris just discussed, principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information Center website, and we really hope that you'll check those out. But let me also touch on a few other things that we're working on here in Illinois. We're focused on advancing smart solar siting and exploring ways that agriculture and solar can coexist through the development of dual-use solar farm projects. This is one of the reasons that we added a Midwest solar specialist to look at the intersection of smart solar siting, dual-use projects, and potential farmland conversion. We're also working to provide educational opportunities to local units of government who are interested in developing local purchase of development right programs. So let's stop here and take a few questions.
Great, thank you, Chris. We have one question, but I encourage folks, if you have questions, please to take a minute to pop them into that questions bar. And again, you do that by looking on the control panel. You see the questions tab, that little square on the far right-hand side. If you click on that, that pops out the questions tab and you can put a question in there. There was one question, Chris, it related to the slide that had that cost of community services mention, and someone asked, can you talk a little bit more about cost of community services? And I'm happy to do that, and to have you jump in if you've got any additional thoughts on that, Chris. So cost of community services are studies that are similar to fiscal impact studies that are often used at the community level to look at the relative allocation of revenues and expenses amongst type of development. And so what that slide showed was, and what has been found in cost of community services over time, and I thank you, Beth, for going back to it, is, and it's very small, but you can see essentially that all the findings of these cost of community service studies are essentially the same, that residential development always costs more in services than it pays in property tax revenue. And conversely, agriculture, even when assessed under agricultural use assessment or ag value, that is always a revenue raiser for the county, because farmland is paying more in those taxes than it requires in municipal services. So there's lots more information about the cost of community studies on our Farmland Information Center website, but that's just a useful thing to know when you are having conversations at the community level and thinking about farmland. Anything to add on that, Chris?
No, very well said, Chris. I think, you know, I think it's just important to note, and thanks for that question. I think that's something that we often don't talk about enough, and so it's really important, especially in our rural communities.
Right. So we have a couple of other questions. One is, this is a good question, and I'm not sure that I am the best one to answer it. We'll pose it. And see if actually anyone else who is listening in wants to offer up thoughts. What are the biggest challenges to getting urban growth boundaries enacted in communities? And I think that's an excellent question, and starting by saying that we do feel that having those urban growth boundaries are very important to put a sort of an outer limit around what you see in terms of municipal development. In terms of the challenges to it, I think it is getting municipal and county officials to appreciate the cost of continued expansion of that urban growth area, and that in fact, as we go back to those cost of community services, the continuing to expand that area is not in the long run fiscally the most fiscally sound alternative. Chris, anything to add on that?
No, I think it's educating those local decision makers, those local municipalities, you know, and utilizing some of that information that we have, you know, from this study, but also from those cost of community service studies, to show that the economic impact that could have on their municipality.
Great. So here's another question. Did we look at, or do we have thoughts on wind farm development? And Chris, you may know more about this in terms of what you're working on in the Midwest. In terms of this report, we did not look at renewable energy development outside of solar. That solar mapping was specific to solar development, not renewable energy development. I think that because the footprint of wind farms are relatively small, and I'm not exactly sure how they would show up, whether they would show up as rural infrastructure. I think maybe they would if they were if they were big enough. But Chris, do you want to talk at all about what you all are doing in the Midwest, if anything, around wind development?
Yeah, we certainly get a lot of questions from, county board members and others that have significant concerns, landowners, farmers as well. But again, it's a much smaller footprint than what we're seeing with solar. We're now hearing and seeing 3,000 to 5,000 acre utility scale solar projects go in. The equivalent of that in wind is much smaller. Does have an impact, of course, and it's still of concern in the rural community. And we've talked with county board members that are seeing proposals for solar and wind in their local communities, and have significant concerns about the impact that might have in their areas.
Great. So this is good. Thank you so much, everyone, for continuing to send in questions. I'm seeing a few more, which is one related to the Farm Bill. What are the sort of estimated, like what is the estimated need and what are opportunities? And I don't know if this related to just conservation or related to the whole Farm Bill, which obviously covers the gamut from commodity programs and crop insurance to conservation to rural energy and other rural needs and nutrition programs. So I think the one thing that I would say on that is just a timetable on the Farm Bill development, which is likely to begin in earnest next year. It needs to be reauthorized or extended by the end of September of next year. The point that I would make, and or one thing to keep in mind, is that, as I mentioned at one point earlier, this Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed through the Senate over the weekend has about roughly $20 billion to fund a number of farm conservation programs. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, Ag Conservation Easement Program. That funding could have a significant impact on then what the next Farm Bill looks like. So I think that's a question of still there's a lot of moving pieces on this. Anything to add there? Chris?
Yeah, Chris also just mentioned that with that Inflation Reduction Act, we also see some significant funding available for rural electric co-ops and in building out some of their renewable energy sources. And we know that there's a lot of farmers and landowners that have been very interested in solar energy generation on farm for their farm use, and so a lot of opportunities yet there through those rural electric co-ops throughout Illinois.
Great. So we have a couple of comments which I think are useful to talk about a little bit. One from someone who's seen a lot of landowners convert acreage into many different lots, and many of them it sets them up for their lifetime and potentially their children and grandchildren's lifetime. And we understand that, and I think that what we would like to see with American Farmland Trust is for landowners to have options, that sometimes selling land for residential or commercial or industrial development may be the only option, if there is not an option, to perhaps sell an agricultural conservation easement. And we feel that giving landowners that option as an alternative way of extracting some of the equity out of their land is extremely important. And we've seen in surveys of landowners where there have been these kinds of programs that is exactly why they have seen the value of that kind of program. A second comment comes from a listener who talks about her mother being on a county planning commission in the 1970s, that they came up with a plan for smart growth, which was approved by the county board, but then the county board made exceptions to their own zoning laws for development. So having a plan is good, but having board members committed is very important. I think that's a really insightful comment, and I think that's important to keep in mind for everybody doing this kind of work. There was one more question, Chris. Let me see if I can get back to it. Here's a question. How can we get real estate and land developers to work with us and be on our sides? What you want to tackle that, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, I think it's a huge challenge, right? You know, it's how do we come together with a common goal of protecting farmland, but also, you know, smart growth development. So I think it's having those conversations. And one thing AFT has done well since 1980 is be, you know, that honest broker between different partners and different entities. And so I think, you know, having that conversation with them, looking at some of this information that we're talking about today and cost to community services, again, I think that's really important.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I think we need to wrap this up, but so there was a question, is this recorded, and will the recording be sent around? That answer is yes. And the next question is one that is going to segue us right into our wrap up here, which is how and who would someone be in touch with to talk about agricultural conservation easements? So that takes me right into this last slide and the two little bullets of information here. Let me talk about each. So the National Agricultural Land Network, as I mentioned at the outset, is a network largely for professionals, but for really anybody who is working either professionally or just as a passion to try and save farmland. And if you are interested in learning about what is happening in other parts of the country, and if you want a place where you can ask questions and get more information on a regular basis from American Farmland Trust, please do consider signing up for the network. It's free, and that URL there on the screen is how you would do that. The Farmland Information Center is what we call a information clearinghouse that we run in collaboration with USDA. It is focused on providing data and information and policy information to both landowners and everyone who has an interest in agricultural land. So if you want to talk more about easements, they would be your first point of contact, though you are welcome to contact me as well. And I will put my name in my contact information in the website, in the chat. But the Farmland Information Center, you can find data about Illinois, about demographics of farmers and landowners. We do a lot of demographic analysis that we put on the Farmland Information Center. There's a lot of information for landowners about what are agricultural conservation easements. There is a lot of policy data. So if you're looking to see what states have done on soil health or agricultural conservation easements or planning, you can find that all on the Information Center. So please feel free to use them as a resource. You see that there's a phone number here. They do have people who answer the phone, so feel free to call them, but there's also a way to contact them via the web as well. And so with that, let me turn it to you, Chris, to close us out for the afternoon.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. You know, Illinois is home to some of the most prime, versatile, and resilient farmland in the nation, and it's something that, as an Illinoisan, I'm very proud of. But when you drive across Illinois, farmland conversion isn't one of the things that often comes to your mind. You know, we see millions of acres of that prime farmland throughout Illinois, but as the previous Farms Under Threat State of the States report showed, we are losing farmland at an alarming rate here in Illinois and across the nation. And as this newest report suggests, we will continue to do so unless we make some significant changes. So, you know, this information is great, and I hope that you all find a way to use it, but also know that we are also here to help. And please feel free to contact myself here in the Midwest region, or our farmland protection manager, our solar specialist, and we're happy to help. Thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Great, thank you.